Hello and welcome to our next video in our functional skills maths course at levels 1 and 2. And this lesson is looking at decimals and how to read, write, order and compare decimals. So the learning outcome for this lesson is to be able to read, write, order and compare decimals. The linked learning is that decimals are actually parts of numbers. They are fractions of numbers. So much like we had fractions in previous lessons, such as a half, where the number on the top is the numerator and the number on the bottom is the denominator, a decimal actually carries out that division, because we know from previous lessons 1/2 means 1 divided by 2, and it hasn't been done yet. Well, what we're going to do in this lesson, as you'll see later on, is we're actually going to do that division to show you how to get your decimals. And decimals are simply fractions with denominators of 10, 100 or 1,000, depending on how many decimal places you have. So a decimal is a fraction of a number with denominators of 10, 100, 1,000 and so on. So let's have a look at what I mean by that. In previous lessons, we talked about whole numbers and place values. So a number such as 325 was 5 ones, 2 tens and 3 hundredths. Well, the decimal point separates your whole numbers from your fractions with respect to decimals. So if we have 325.5, then 0.5 means 5/10 because of its place value. If we have another number, such as 64.13, then the 1/3 are the parts of numbers. They're separated from the whole numbers by the decimal point, and the 1/3 means 13 hundredths. And then finally, another number, such as 8.794 means 8 is the whole number. The decimal point separates the whole numbers from the parts of numbers, the fractions of numbers, and this fraction is 794 over 1,000. So the decimal denominator is dictated by how many decimal places you have. So 1 decimal place is tenths, 2 decimal places is hundredths, and 3 decimal places is thousandths. So here is an extract from our CGP exercise books that show you that the number 10.375 is made up of tens and units for the 10, and then the 0.375 is 3 tenths, 5 hundredths and 7 thousandths, or in one go you could say 357 thousandths. That's what 0.357 means in mathematics. So the number of places after the decimal point dictates what the denominator is for our fraction of a number. So here we have 6.1234. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So this number would be 1,234 over 1 and 4 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places, 4 zeros. So 1,234 over 10,000. So the decimal place is how many numbers you have after the decimal point, and that will dictate your denominator as well. Now there are two main sorts of decimals. There are neat decimals called terminating decimals, which end when you actually do the division. So as we said at the start of the lesson, that 1/2 means 1 divided by 2. That hasn't been done yet. And when we do that division, we get 0.5. So let's look at that division. I have 1 and I want to divide it by 2. Now 2 doesn't go into 1, so we put a 0 there and carry the 1. And the whole numbers finish with our 1. So we put a decimal point after the 1 and after the 0 here of the division. Then we have an infinite number of zeros here that we can use when we want to call on them. So now we've carried the 1, it becomes 2 into 10 goes 5 times. So the reason a half is 0.5 is because when I divide 1 by 2, I get 0.5 or 5/10, which when I simplify, if we go back to our fractions lesson, is a half. So 5/10 is the same as a half. So when we divide the numerator by the denominator, it creates our decimal 0.5. Now this is a terminating decimal because it finishes quite neatly. So when I divide the 1 by the 2, it gives me 0.5 and finishes with the division quite nicely. However, with some fractions, you don't have a neat finish and they go on forever, and they're called recurring decimals. So let's look at another decimal that we're familiar with, which is 1/3. And this is just another way of writing 1 divided by 3 that hasn't been done yet. So remembering what we did on the last slide, 3 doesn't go into 1, and then the whole numbers finish, and we carry the 1. And there's an infinite number of zeros we can call on. So now we're looking at 3 into 10. So 10 divided by 3 goes 3 times, which is 9, which means a remainder of 1. And I can call on one of my invisible zeros. So 3 goes into 10 3 times, remainder 1. And I can call on an invisible 0. So 3 goes into 10 3 times, remainder 1. And you can see where we're going with this. That if I did this division, it would be 0.33333333. And it would never end. Now we can't really write this because we kind of run out of ink and run out of space and so on. So a recurring decimal can actually be written in a neater way. And we can say 0.3 and then a little dot over the 3 tells us that it goes on forever. It recurs and goes on forever. And that little dot is quite important, especially when you start doing calculations on your calculator. Some of you may miss that dot and think that 1/3 is 0.3. Well, that's a totally different fraction. 1/3 is 0.3 recurring. Let's have a quick look at all our basic fractions to show you which are terminating and which recur. And if you're not sure of some of these, all you need to do is the division of these fractions to show you whether they recur or they terminate. So some of the ones you are probably familiar with at school were that a half is 0.5. You may remember that a third recurs to 0.3. We also remember a quarter is 0.25, and that some of you may remember that when you divide 1 by 5, it's 0.2. Some of the bigger denominators might not be as familiar. So 1/6 is 0.16 recurring. This means 0.16666 that goes on forever. 1/7 is the same, it recurs. Now here it's 0.142857 and there's a recurring dot over the 1 and the 7. And what that means is it recurs between those numbers. So it goes 142857, 142857, and so on. So when you have two dots, the recurrence is all of the numbers between the two dots, not just the one dot where it's just that number that recurs. If you divide 1 by 8, it terminates. It's quite neatly 0.125. 1/9 is 0.1 recurring. In other words, 0.1 and it goes on forever. And then finally, 1 divided by 10 quite neatly is 0.1. And it's good to become familiar with these basic fractions and how they relate to decimals and whether they terminate or recur. Now let's look at an exam style question. It's asking us what is 3/5 as a decimal, and we need to circle our answer. Well, now we know this relationship between a fraction and a decimal, we know that 3/5 means 3 divided by 5. And we know that 5 doesn't divide into 3, and that's where the whole numbers finish. So we put in our decimal place. We carry the 3. We now put in one of our invisible zeros that we have after our decimal point. So now we can ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 30? Well, I know it goes in 6 times. So it's a terminating decimal. There's no remainder left. So 3/5, when we do the maths, is actually 0.6. Now that we understand the relationship between a fraction and a decimal and what a decimal is, we can go the other way and we can actually say that I know that our decimal 0.125 can be converted into a fraction because the 125 is over tens, hundreds, thousands. So 3 zeros after our 1. So the place values of 125 is thousands. It's 125 thousandths. And now we can do our simplification. What number goes into 125 and 1,000? Well, I know 5 divides into both of them. So 125 divided by 5. 5 goes into 12 twice, remainder 2. 5 goes into 25 5 times. So I end up with 25 over 5 goes into 10 twice, 200. And I can do that again. I know that 5 goes into both of these. So 25 divided by 5 is 5. 200 divided by 5 is 40. And then finally, I can see 5 divides into both of these. 5 divides into 5 once, and 5 goes into 40 8 times. So the decimal 0.125 can be converted into a fraction by making it 125 over 1,000 and then simplifying it, if you want to, over a number of stages to get the fraction in its simplest terms of 1/8. When we come to look at the calculator in the next lesson, you'll see that you can do this easily by pressing the SD button on your calculator, and that will switch between fractions and decimals for you. So in order to read decimals, what they're alluding to is, do you understand the place values of the decimals? So that 0.1 actually means 1/10. And that the decimal 0.12 means 12 over 100, because there are 2 decimal places. It's 100. And with this, you would simplify it to 6 over 50, and then you can see 2 divides into both of these, so 3 over 25. And finally, as we did on the last slide, we know that 0.125 is 125 over 1,000 because of the place values, and that's simplified to 1/8. To write decimals, just put the place values. So 6/10 means 0.6, because our denominator is 10. We have just the one place. If you have 58 hundredths, then it's 0.58, because 58 over 100 is what this decimal means. 0.58 means 58 over 100, 58 hundredths. And finally, the fraction 842 thousandths is 0.8 842 because we know 842 is over 1,000. Now, there is a slight trick when you're comparing decimals. Here I've got a basic question that is asking me to put the correct symbol, remember our comparing symbol of less than or greater than from previous lessons, between these two numbers, 11.108 and 11.18. Now, some people may look at it and say, oh, there's 108 here and there's only 18 there, therefore this one is bigger. And that's a common error. What you need to remember is to make them both the same length after the decimal point, so you're comparing like with like. So here we have 3 decimal places, here we only have 2, so we can call up one of our invisible zeros. It doesn't affect what the number is. So here we have 11.108, but here we have 11.180. So this is the bigger number. 11.180 is bigger than, so here we need this symbol. So 11.180, the bigger end on our symbol is this end, is greater than 11.108. So the way you compare decimals is to make the decimal places the same, and then that will give you a truer value. But don't forget to compare the whole numbers first. Don't become obsessed with just the decimals. So now we know how to compare decimals, let's look at ordering decimals. So it's asking us to put these decimals in ascending order. In other words, remember what the buzzword ascending means? From small to big, ascending something, going up in value. So we need to find the smallest number. Now all of our units are 6s, so we've compared that and there's no difference. So in order to compare our decimals, we need to make these decimal places all the same so that we can compare like with like. Now I can compare 300 with 30, with 303, 33, and just the number 3. So our smallest number is the number 3, so 6.003 is our smallest. Then our next smallest is 6.03. Don't forget we've put this 0 in here. Then we're looking at 33 here, so 6.033. And then we've got 300 before we have 303. So these are ordered in ascending order, starting with the smallest and then getting bigger. Here's another exercise at ordering decimals. So have a go yourselves, not forgetting the techniques we've shown you. Okay, so the way we do this is we make all of our decimals the same length, so they have the same number of place values. Now we can compare like with like. All of the numbers have the number 4, so there are no units to order. So we're now ordering decimals. So I have 80, 75, 100, 9, and 101. Now, because it says ascending order, we're going from the smallest value to the biggest. So our smallest value is the number 9. So that's 9 thousandths. The next smallest number is 75. And the next after this is 80. After that, we have 100. And then finally, 101. Now notice how I dropped the zeros because I put the zeros in on the original numbers. So here's an exam style question for you. Don't forget to pause the video on any exercises we do to give yourself more time to have a go. Janine records the costs of her shopping over 4 weeks, and here are the 4 amounts. Organise the amounts in descending order, so from high to low. Remember our buzzword, descending. So we need to find the smallest value. So we need to find the biggest value. So this time look at your whole numbers, and the biggest whole number is 54. All the others are 45. So our biggest value is 54.45. Then all our remaining values have got 2 decimal places. So we're comparing 54 with 45 with 55. So our next biggest value is 45.55. Then it's 45.54 because it's less than the 55. And then finally 45.45. So that completes our learning outcome, where we need to read, write, order and compare decimals. Okay, I just want to do a really important recap with you. It's one of Pete's top tips, and that is this ability to switch between a fraction and a decimal. Now, some of the fractions you'll be expected to know off the top of your head, especially at level 1. This is kind of a level 2 skill. So you need to understand that a half is 0.5 and that a quarter is 0.25. But sometimes you come across decimals that are slightly different that you need to work out. So let's just say we're going from a fraction to a decimal, and we have a fraction, for example, of 4/5. How do we convert it into a decimal? So to go this way, we do the division. So we divide the number 4 by 5, because that's what a fraction is. 4 needs to be divided by 5. And when did we divide 4 by 5? It doesn't go, and we finish with our whole numbers, and we carry the 4 into our parts of numbers. And we have 5 into 40 goes 8 times. So the fraction 4/5 is the decimal 0.8. When we go the other way and we convert a decimal, let's just say a decimal 0.12, to get it into a fraction, we need to know the place values. So these are tenths and these are hundredths. So you need to be able to understand that the decimal 0.12 is the fraction 12 over 100. So that's tenths and hundredths. And in order to turn it into our fraction, which it already is, we just need to simplify. So we know 2 goes into both of them, so it's 6 over 50. And then we know 2 goes into both of those, so it's 3 over 25. So the decimal 0.12 means the fraction 3 over 25. If you practice this fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions, it will make a lot more of the course to come easier for you. And that's why it's a top tip. Let's have a look at the buzzwords for this lesson. So the first thing we came across is the decimal point. And the decimal point separates whole numbers from parts of numbers. So that's 3 whole numbers, and this is parts of a number. And the decimal place tells us what this part of a number is worth, where the first place value is tenths, the second place value is hundredths, and the third place value is thousandths. So 0.523 would be 523 over 1,000. And we said there are 2 sorts of decimals to look out for. There's decimals that end naturally, called terminating decimals, like 0.5, which finish, and there are recurring decimals like 0.3 recurring, which are signified by the little dot above the decimal. And that's just another way of saving you writing 0.3 goes on forever. Don't forget there can be two recurring dots. So if we have 0.125 with a dot over the 1 and a dot over the 5, it means it recurs between the 1 and the 5. So it's 0.125, 125, 125, and so on. And that completes this lesson on reading, writing, ordering, and comparing decimals. I hope it's been of some use to you. Thank you for watching.